The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode I talked with Otto Dobretsberger about Photino, a lightweight open-source framework for building native cross-platform desktop applications with web UI technology. We talked about why you might decide to take an existing web app and use it with Photino to create a desktop application, why you might do that rather than provide a progressive web app, and some of the things which might be coming in a later release of Photino. Along the way, we discussed some of the difficulties in creating cross-platform UI-based applications, and some of the things that, say, Flatpak, AppImage, and Snap are trying to solve on the Linux desktop. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I'd like to say, Otto, is thank you ever so much for being on the show. We're across several different time zones and, we've had to plan this around a vacation. So I'm sorry for interrupting your day and your vacation and stuff. So thank you ever so much.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you ever so much. But yeah, so we're going to be talking a little bit about Photino. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But first, I wonder, would you mind giving listeners a bit of a quick, maybe an elevator pitch about you and where you're at and the kind of work that you're doing, just so that they get an idea of a flavor of who Otto is?
Yeah, of course. I'm originally from Austria, but been living in Texas for the last 12, 13 years. I got my PhD in computer science here and started working in the industry. Been working as a full stack developer for the last decade now. And interested in a variety of languages, technologies, that sort of stuff, typical programmer stuff.
Cool. Part of me is thinking, how, I don't know whether you see that at these kinds of things in the States, but when there's a job listing and it says, a computer science degree or 2 to 3 years of experience is required. And then you walk in with a PhD, they're like, well, do you not get told that maybe you're overqualified or something? A genuine question, I don't know,
I don't think so, because in this industry, really, knowledge and skill outweighs academic degrees, in my opinion, right? It opens doors, of course, if you have it, and I would definitely recommend doing it. But at the end of the day, the thing that matters is what you can do. And I know people, a lot of people who don't have a degree and are excellent, high-level full-stack developer, back-end developers, anything. I mean, it's really just a door opener, I think. But ultimately, it depends on what you do and how good you are at what you're doing.
Sure. Okay. A very small part of me is thinking perhaps a PhD might be a bit too much for, if you want to go all the way down that route and then be
of course,
that's, I'm not trying to offend or anything.
That's true. I mean, and that wasn't the plan initially either. I mean, initially I got my PhD in computer science with application in genetics and genomics, which is completely different to the industry I'm working in right now. So that wasn't originally the plan either, but that's how it turned out, and that's where I am.
Cool. I like it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I like it. So just as a tangential question then, which is harder, modern full stack development or doing a PhD?
That's a tough question, because if you consider not things that are just harder, but there's nowadays, full stack development isn't just plain programming anymore. It's a lot of setup, configuration, deployment, integration, code management, Git management, that sort of stuff. And it's just overwhelming for people who get into this industry to be part of every single aspect of a project like this, right? So it's insane to be a full stack developer and do all of these things. So I wouldn't say, well, maybe harder, more tedious for sure. Let's put it that way.
Okay, yeah. No, I can totally understand that. I am specifically a server side back end engineer, just
Mm-hmm.
because like my personal opinion, and I feel like we could talk about it a little related to Photino, is that like
Mm-hmm.
there are so many front end
Yeah.
technologies. Yes, they're all just, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully you can hear the bunny quotes there, just CSS and JavaScript, but like
Yeah.
you can't like how do I put it? A React code base, because it's attacking the problem in a completely different way to, say, an Angular code base,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just sort of easily context switch between them, right? It,
Correct.
it is a skill to be a React developer. It is a skill
Absolutely.
to be an Angular developer.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
keeping up with both of those as they change must be so difficult to do. That's what, like I said, that's why I'm like, nope, I'm the server side person. That's
Yeah.
all I'll do.
Yeah. And then it's not just all the different flavors for web development. Then you have all the different flavors now for mobile development. It's not just what it used to be. Hey, you do Java for Android, and you do, Objective C for iOS. No, now you have just as many different technologies you can pick and choose from for either platform, and you have cross-platform technologies that you can pick, which are again different language maybe. So front-end development is a broad landscape now, a lot of different things.
It is, and with all the different, not just like you say, not just web browser and
Mm.
cell phones, mobile phones, whatever. You've also got like smartwatches and
Yeah.
all that kind of. So there's different form factors, right?
And not only do you have all these different, technologies and languages for let's say web development, then you have all the different devices that need to run it. So you create a web app that needs to run on a browser, then it needs to run on a browser on a 4K display, maybe an 8K display, needs to run on an iPad, needs to run on a phone, maybe on a smart fridge. I don't know. I mean, all these displays are different size, different shapes, and your web app's supposed to run on everything.
Yeah, it's a maddening series of
Mm-hmm.
and like you say, that's just web,
That's
right?
just
And
web.
I'm putting
Yeah.
the bunny quotes around that, but like then you go, I tell you what, I want to make an app that sits
Mm-hmm.
on the device.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things which I hope we'll get into when we talk about Photino is that like there is no one way to make a cross-platform .NET app targeting Windows, Mac, and the many Linuxes,
Mm-hmm.
because that in itself, I feel like, is a hard problem to
Right.
solve, right?
Right. Right. Yep. Absolutely. There's different things you can do. There's different technologies you can do. They're all different. They all allow you to use different languages. But there is no golden bullet or silver bullet for, hey, I want to do this, and I'd want to do it for everything. There's no, compromising.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. I mean, API space is different, permissions is
Mhm.
different,
Correct.
the way that things are drawn on screen are different, and not just
Mm-hmm.
like you call the Windows 32 API to draw a window and you call some other API to draw a window on macOS. It's
Mm-hmm.
also things like the orientation of the icons, right? It's
Yeah.
like macOS, your close, minimize, maximize are on the top left.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Absolutely.
rather, the majority of other desktop environments, they're on the top right.
Mm-hmm.
And you sometimes find, because I use the GNU image manipulation program a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and when I'm on Windows, the save and cancel buttons I think are right and left in
Mm-hmm.
the bottom right hand corner of modals, and then on Linuxes and Unixes they are in the same like global position but up but like swapped around. So it's instead of save on the right and cancel on the left, it's
Yeah.
save on the left and cancel on the right.
Yeah, all these things you have to consider when you try to work on something that's cross-platform but looks and behaves natively in the corresponding operating systems. So you don't want to create something that looks like a Windows app, but then looks like a Windows app on a Mac as well, right? You want people to think, okay, that's a genuine Mac app when they run it on a Mac.
Sure.
So lots of things to
So
consider there.
I guess that leads us into discussion of Photino, right?
Yeah.
Firstly, am I pronouncing it correctly? And secondly, what is Photino?
Well, Photino, it is an effort that we have started as an open source project to create a platform that allows people to make cross-platform native applications for Linux, Mac, and Windows, and not having to use a new language or learn a new language, but use their existing skills in web development to do that, and not just their skills in web development, but even use their existing web applications to deploy them as a native app in the respective operating systems or wherever they want. And it's a project that we picked up, initially started from Steve Sanderson. And it was initially running on .NET Core 3.1. And we took it over and made that open source project, ported it to .NET 5, .NET 6, and opened it up to the community, let the community participate in, and moved it forward. And are now at a stage where we have people using it. We have some people in the industry using it that use either their existing projects that they have written in web tech, or that they started a new project from scratch in one of their web technologies of their choice to create this native desktop application. And the driving force behind it was really that we looked at different options that were out there to create cross-platform applications that run on any operating system, or available on any operating system. But what was out there always seemed very convoluted, very bloated, a lot of extra stuff, especially when the stuff that was there was based on Node.js. It's always a massive package, even for a single small Hello World program. And we didn't like that, right? We said, hey, if I create an empty project that says Hello World, that shouldn't require hundreds of megabytes of memory. It should be small. And the file size of that application should be small too. I shouldn't have to download 200 megabytes of a file if I have a Hello World opening in a blank window, right? So that's where we were said, okay, going to make sure it stays small. The only thing that is required to have it installed on your machine is the .NET 5, and then it's a really, really small application that you download that uses minimal amount of memory, and you can run your web applications in it, deploy them as an executable on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And Linux, I'm not saying Linux as a whole, right? Because it would be a massive undertaking to try it and test it and confirm it for every flavor of Linux that's out there. So when I say Linux, I really mean Ubuntu. That's the distribution that we've been working with and that we tested on.
That all makes sense. I mean, there are... Oh, geez. I mean, I'm not going to count them, but if you go to Wikipedia, type in list of Linux distributions, they have an image which shows the Linux family tree. And it is that big that if you take an 8K monitor and turn it sideways, you still can't fit the whole thing in without having to zoom all the way out, right? Yeah. There are a million different Linuxes, so I totally understand that it is not an easy or trivial problem to put a desktop application on a Linux.
Right. And I'm not saying, it won't run on any of the others. There's probably some out there where just when you create it, deploy it for a Linux distribution, it will run on something else. And then there will be some that it won't run where you have to, tweak a few things. So like I said, it would be too much to test it on every single distribution that's out there.
Sure, but I guess, and this is not a question for you to answer, but I feel like things like Flatpak and app images are helping to solve that problem. So for folks who don't know, that's where you take your application and all of the things that it depends on, and it puts it into a single binary. It's kind of a binary, and it's not, which essentially acts as almost like an image that expands at runtime and runs from that directory. So then you don't have to worry about, well, my distribution may have version 12 of this library and your application requires version 14. I don't need to update my entire system just to run your application. If it's wrapped in a Flatpak or an app image or even a snap, then you can supply version 14 of the dependency with your application, and then at runtime, there's some magic and wizardry going on around like dependency rebinding and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That helps making sure things run smoothly whenever you want to deploy it and distribute it to machines supposed to run the application on. Because that's the other thing with web applications. It's a lot of dependencies. Always a lot of packages you depend on, and then the packages update, the packages upgrade. Suddenly, other packages don't work anymore. Your app doesn't work anymore. Something is broken. So in web development in general, that's a problem, right? That you dealing with all these libraries, versions, upgrades, and all this all the time. So having that in a controlled environment definitely helps with any application that is based on web technology when you deploy it.
Sure. And like I say, it's not a problem that's unique to Photino, and it's not Photino specifically is looking at. But
correct.
if if listeners want to get an idea of some of the problems that are faced by people who want to target Linux as a distribution for your application, take a look at Flatpak, App Image, and Snap, and realize that it's kind of a non-trivial problem, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true.
Excellent. Okay, so I do have a question before we get deeper into Photino, right? If one of the things is that you could take this existing web app and make it into a binary you can run on your computer, what are the differences between Photino and, say, a progressive web app? Other differences.
Well, yes, Photino allows you to, first of all, get down on a very low level for system calls. So on Photino, you have access to the underlying system calls for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and you can do very low-level operations on it and have a callback loop into your application that you can start this from and get responses for. That allows you to dig into things that a progressive web app can't do. The distribution, you can, if you have a progressive web app, distribution is okay. You have to go to a web address, right, and run the app, and then say, okay, install it on that machine. Versus on a Photino, you could distribute it offline, so to say, too, right? You can say, I want to send this file to a hard drive, to a USB stick, to whatever medium you want, and distribute it that way, right? It's not a URL people have to go to download it and install it. You can install it on, a device that runs by itself in full screen mode. Like think of in the service industry, like restaurants, that sort of stuff, kiosk type applications, right? That you set up, you plug it into a computer, you drag over whatever files, whatever apps you need, and then you run it on that screen. That screen then doesn't have to have internet connection, doesn't have to have, that device doesn't have to have any connection to the internet. You can set that up as an offline app and have it work as a standalone thing that you set up as a kiosk type application. And progressive web app, I don't know where the trend is going. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I read Firefox is disabling support for it. Is that right? So
I'm not sure.
If I'm wrong, but I think I read that. So I don't know where this is going. It feels like it's a acceptable for a solution for, let's say, apps, right? Typical little apps that you have, but not for industry projects that you seriously half driving a business. Right? Then I don't feel like that has the power to do it yet.
Sure.
Soon, maybe not. I don't know. But right now, I don't feel like progressive web apps are at a point where they can manage applications on a larger scale that are central to running and driving a business in that sense.
Sure. I understand that. And I think even like with progressive web apps, the installation process is a little weird. Like,
Yeah.
um, I use a system to track the books that I read, and they don't have a native app. So on their website, it quite literally says, "Okay, open the website on your device, then hit File, then hit Install, and it will install it that way." And that's not. It's not a. I mean, I guess it's becoming a standard way to do things, but it's not like a standard setup for installing an app.
Right.
And so, if for instance your target customer is someone who's not, say, tech savvy, or doesn't use the file menu in a browser, because let's be honest, when was the last time you went file open or file anything inside of a browser?
Especially
Right?
on a mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's absolutely not standard way to install things and distribute things.
Yeah, right. Whereas, like, if you've got an installer or a zip file that you just need to extract and then run the binary, that's relatively trivial for the majority of users, right?
Correct. Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so you've said that Photino is based on an idea that Steve Sanderson had with this WebView project.
Correct.
So I guess the folks over at Photino took this idea and went, right, okay, let's keep everything up to date in that and maybe build something around that. So, like, listeners aren't sitting here going, yeah, but his example was like 2 years ago. And he explicitly said in his example, don't use this for production. So I guess you've taken on the burden of like keeping that up to date and all that kind of stuff.
Right, correct. Because I mean, another issue back then was Microsoft said, okay, we're going away from .NET Framework. We're doing this .NET Core thing now, but we already know this is not going to be the end of the road, right? We're going to do another switch. We're going to go to what turns out now to be .NET 5, then .NET 6. So there's a lot of things that changed throughout this process, right, with the different .NET frameworks until we now landed, okay, we have this one .NET that we all follow, right? We don't need .NET Framework anymore. We don't need .NET Core anymore. We're just going .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7 soon. So everything has become more streamlined in that sense. The developer community knows, okay, this is the framework that we're using moving forward. Right? Of course, there is some maintenance stuff that's based on older versions that's going on the sidelines, I guess. But yeah, and then of course, with the technology it's based on, WebView 2. It just we've tried to maintain it, keep it up to date, and keep all the dependencies up to date. And moving forward, make sure that everything that changes in the web technologies that we support also are kept up to date, especially with Blazor. Because with Blazor, it's interesting, right? Because on Microsoft's side, they said, okay, we can do Blazor for desktop now, right? Where you can do Blazor apps that can deploy as desktop apps. And so initially, we were thinking, okay, well, we're trying to move along and keep up with the changes. We have sample apps for Angular, for React, for Vue, and for Blazor. And we're like, okay, well, Microsoft is doing their own thing with deploying Blazor desktop apps. So we're not sure if we should continue that effort with Blazor on our side too, because it would be kind of alternative, almost kind of competing effort. And to convince people to use Blazor but use Photino rather than use Blazor that they already have an app and Blazor for desktop deployment instead would be another argument to make. So we initially said, okay, maybe we should drop Blazor support and concentrate on the other web development frameworks. And the community said no. The community said they wanted it. There were a lot of people who were using it, and we had some people in the community, get involved, and keep up to date, keep up with the changes that were made to the Blazor repositories. And Blazor is still in there, so we're still moving forward with it too. Especially thanks to a lot of people who have helped us in the community, because we're not doing this. Is not our job. Photino is not our job, right? This is a open source voluntary effort from us. So of course we don't have 40 hours a week to put into this. So we rely on other people to come in and say, hey, no, we really want this. We're gonna contribute. We're gonna help, and they did, and so Blazor is still there.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode's show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you, and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it. Excellent. Okay. So it supports Blazor. It's been updated to the V-latest stack of .NET. But can I literally just bring, any JavaScript, CSS, anything in it? Because obviously it's just a web browser, right? But it's running that
Correct.
on a native machine.
You can either start a new project with an HTML file, JavaScript, CSS, or you can use an existing project of yours. Let's say you have a Vue app or an Angular app or a React app or something. You deploy it, you build it into a dist folder. You link that, or you deploy it directly into we have the www root folder. Deploy it into that folder, link it to where the entrance file is, usually an index, and that's it. Photino will spin up, will create the window, will load your web application from there, and you still have all the web tech help as well in the Photino app. Right? In Photino applications, you can hit F12, bring up the dev tools, so you can on any operating system. So you can do that still, right? You can still have all the stuff that you used to on a typical web application. You just now having it run as an application in Photino.
Excellent. All right. So you've still got that sort of modern web front end part, but with also being able to talk to the low level system, right? So you can store files on disk. You can maybe play around with all the other APIs that you have access to locally. Right?
Correct. Yeah, and you can, for instance, something very conveniently do I want a borderless window, right? I don't want the Chrome around the window. I don't want the minimize, maximus, close button. I wanted the app to start up in full screen, cover the entire screen, and not give the user an option to close the window, right? For instance, when you make kiosk apps, right, like this, where you want people to use this app and only this app, nothing else, disable other system calls, make the app full screen, disable the Chrome, and then that's the only thing people can interact with is the application that's running, nothing underneath, right? Very helpful in that sense. So, if you have devices where you have a lot of different people using it, you don't know who's going to use it, what they're going to do on it, but you want to restrict what they can do. Very, very good solution to do that. And you have, the UI, just like you design it in your web application, menus and whatever. But you can also, that's something that we're working on, and that's in our pipeline, very high up in the to-do list, is the native window menu management, menu creation, so that you have the typical Windows menus that you can show if you want to, the typical Mac navigation and the menus, navigation bars, menu bars, and so on that you have for Linux as well. so that you can create menus based on the look and feel of the operating system, but have these menus still talk to your web application that runs. So that's high up on our to-do list is long, right? It's a lot of things people request, a lot of things that we know we want to do. A lot of stuff is on our to-do list, and one at a time, we try to work ourselves down this list.
Sure. And I guess that's one of the things that happens with open source development, right? It's like a bunch of people come along and say, it would be really cool if you could do this. And you're like, okay, absolutely. But we're all, essentially we're volunteers. And, there's a reason why the response of, sure, if you want to code it and put in a pull request, we'll take it. There's a reason why that exists, right?
Exactly. And we've had that, right? There was instances where people said, hey, this would be really cool to have. Is it okay if I do this? Would you accept it? I said, absolutely, right? Do it, put in a pull request, we'll check it out. And if everything checks out, it'll be in the next release, right? And so that stuff happens. So always very glad if people do that, right? Because it will help us and help everybody else who wants to use it also.
Great stuff. So that's another thing that I guess a lot of web-specific developers don't really face. So let's say I want to do a UDP request, right? I don't want to use sockets. I don't want to use TCP. I don't want to use any of those high-level abstracted stuff. Or maybe I want to use gRPC, right? If I want to do UDP gRPC within React, Angular, whatever, I have to use like plugins and pull in extra code, and it has to remap stuff. But I guess because it's running on the desktop using the APIs available for the computer that the operating system is running on, putting in a request for a I'm going to say non-standard, but I mean non-TCP,
right?
A non-standard web request is relatively trivial, right? As long as the framework you're talking to understands it, because then that can,
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, you have when you do Photino applications, you have choice of how deep you want to get into the nitty-gritty underlying system development as well, right? You can use Photino as a NuGet package and just concentrate on your UI stuff, right, and do that. But you can also use Photino and get, the level that's the uncompiled level where you get the stuff that's based on .NET and work in C# on the .NET level that then builds your Photino application in .NET. Anything you can do in .NET, whatever you want, whatever calls you want to make, whatever services you want to use, you can make those then communicate through the callback loop with your application, right? It's just the level of or how deep you want to get into the development on the system level just is up to you. You can either do it very high level and just get the finished compiled library to deploy your application, or you can get a level deeper and say, okay, I'm getting the .NET part of the Photino application also. I can see the code for it. I can make changes to that code. I can expand it. If it's something really cool, make a pull request for it and we'll adapt it even. But yeah, and then you say, hey, I'm going to, spin up some gRPC calls, do that in .NET, and then have, whatever communication parameters come to and from the web app, communicate with that. Of course, you can do that.
Excellent. Okay. So let's say I've got this web application. I want to put it into Photino. I want to do some extra stuff. What are some specific issues I might run into? Because it's a slightly different paradigm, right? I'm used to my app runs in a browser. It talks to an external service, perhaps, or a number of external services, and then does things inside the browser. If I put everything inside of an application, perhaps I could put those services inside of Photino with it?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the level of architecture of your application and how complex it is, I guess, right? If you have an app that when you build it, and you can build it into a dist folder, and you have an index where this app starts once it's built, and then it starts and builds from and runs from there. it will be quite, easy to just say, okay, I'm moving these contents from my build folder into the www root folder from Photino, linked to the starting file index, probably, and have Photino take over from there. Probably very, very few issues. However, if you have a very complex application with a very complex build process, maybe have a separate server spin up for your services that you have communication and security levels for. Try, it's going to be a try and error kind of thing. How well it will just, let's say, just work, or whether you have to make adjustments for it, right? It's kind of like, if you think about it, similar to, you have your app and you want to deploy it, right? Let's say you want to deploy it to Azure. If it's a standalone app that has one entry point and everything is contained, and you want to deploy it on Azure or on AWS, it's going to be fairly, let's say, straightforward. If you have an app that spins up a local server, and you develop it and debug it, and then you also spin up let's say, another Node.js server for the services with your APIs on and all kinds of communication related things, and then you have to maybe have a third one or another security level that you need to build, and then you have to deploy all of this to Azure or to AWS. You can do it, right? It's not going to be as straightforward though as the first example that I gave, right? So it's kind of like the same analogy here. Instead of deploying the whole package to a web server, right, you're deploying essentially it into where Photino encapsulates it and has it, contained in itself, so to say. That the analogy, I guess, is fitting in that sense.
Okay. So then, like, as long as you are taking care of things like this, you mentioned there, say you have an API for security or a service for security, as long as you are taking care of that within itself, right? The service itself, the application itself is written in such a way that it is taking those considerations into taking those potential issues into consideration, then it shouldn't be a huge problem to lift and shift, but you could run into some issues. It's worth, right, like you say, it's worth trying out, right? And don't just go, right, I will push the button, I will deploy it as Photino. It's done.
I'm not going to make that statement that, you just put it there and hit run and it's good, because there were people or companies or organizations out before who have said that, and it just didn't work. We all know that if somebody makes a statement like this, a bold statement like this, there's, the first thing people do is, find a way to break it, to say, okay, that wasn't true what you said. So that would be a bold statement, I'm refraining to make, but it should, in theory, not pose too many issues in that sense then.
Sure, and I feel like it's on us developers who are using whatever library, framework, or tool or system. When we use it, it's on us to do our due diligence to actually make sure it works, right? It's not It's not on the library creator, it's not on the tool creator. Right. It's on us.
Yeah, I mean that's really what Photino isn't going to do a magic management job for your application, right? Your application, your web application, is supposed to build into a folder, and that's the built app, right? The built web app, and if that folder has an entry point, that's the index. Or it doesn't have to be index, you can call it whatever. If Photino finds or is given such an entry point of, this is where the app, launches, then Photino does its job, right?
Yeah.
If the app itself then needs further management or whatever, of course, that's on the developer then.
Sure, that makes sense. So what about some of the newer features that are coming down the pipe then? We've said, so a little bit of insider baseball. When we do episodes like this, we fill in a little document to talk about some of the features we want to talk about. And you've mentioned to me a number of new things that might be coming down the pipe. Right? I'm not trying to hold you to what you're about to say.
I personally am very interested in two things. The first thing is mobile support, which is a huge undertaking. And the second thing is Raspberry Pi support. And I just last week got my hands on a Raspberry Pi 4. And I'm going to, hopefully this week, if I find the time, start messing around with it and see what we can do, because I have a feeling it would be a prime example of a good scenario where Photino can make a really, really good case for it, right? Because Raspberry Pis, small devices, all you need is a Raspberry Pi and a monitor. You can run something on it. If I can run Ubuntu apps on the Raspberry Pi, if I can run Photino apps on the Raspberry Pi, this could be anything from IoT devices to kiosk type devices to whatever, right? I mean, this is the application or possibilities for application are very, very massive in that sense. So I'm really, really personally interested in that. And this could go either way, right? This could be something I plug in, deploy, and it works. Or this could be something I plug in, deploy, and sit there for 3 or 4 weeks and try to make it work. So, because I haven't started on it yet, but I got my hands on that, on the hardware. So that's for me next in the pipeline, at least. In general, the most requests or most things that people talk is mobile, having iOS and Android support for it. It's going to be a massive undertaking to do it, but it's in the pipeline. It's on a to-do list. We just have to find the time, right, to do it, to sit down with the whole team, and maybe even get the community involved too. That'd be amazing. But that would make a big change as well, right? We already have released a lot of changes in the version we put out earlier this year, so version 2. Having mobile support on it would be another massive change. It would be something really, really helpful for a lot of people who want to do true cross-platform, not just for desktop, but then also mobile deployment. So hopefully also something that we get to soon. We'll see.
I like it because I can see low-powered ARM devices being kind of the future for a lot of things. Like, I don't know what it's like throughout the rest of the world, but especially in the UK, as an example, commerce, right? You go into a store, you go up to either a self-service machine or you're dealing with someone who's sitting at a checkout helping you out. They're sitting there in front of a full computer that is running, and they're not weak computers. They're really powerful Intel style x86, x64 machines sitting there, what is basically a web app.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I can see that being a great, really quick way for a lot of companies to immediately reduce their power throughput and maybe even, dare I say it, CO2 footprint, because you're dropping from a relatively super powerful desktop computer that is an office-style desktop computer all the way down to a Raspberry Pi, which is like 5 volts, 3 point something amps or something like that. I don't know the actual power consumption. Please let me know.
Very small though.
So whatever, but yeah, I can see that as being a really cheap way to immediately reduce the carbon footprint of commerce, right?
Right.
Or maybe an office, right? Or something like that.
Yes, of course, right? I mean, the thing is also, in general, the machines in most scenarios, or in a lot of scenarios, they don't have to be as powerful anymore as they used to be, even in offices, right? Even if you have office buildings, a lot of times it would be sufficient to have a good monitor and a good internet connection, right? Because if you have a good monitor, good internet connection, you can run a browser with a web app that runs on a server-side web app. Hardware on a client doesn't really matter. Or if you have some remote to log into, right? If you have a lot of VMs or something to run on, the client machine really doesn't matter anymore. And here in the US, what we see, I don't know if it's similar in the UK, but in the US, we see a lot of stores have, these self-checkout, self-payment type of things, where, you have a screen that you interact with that is powered by a computer, right? Which really doesn't need a computer like this, right? You need a screen, and Raspberry Pi glued to the back, I guess. That's all it really needs to make such, grocery stores, self-checkout things, or restaurants even, right? We have restaurants where there's a screen on the table. You don't even interact with the server anymore. You just have a screen where you order, and then in some places a waiter comes and brings you your order. Some places the screen tells you your order is ready, and you walk up to the kitchen desk and pick it up yourself. So all of this is just powered by a screen on each table. So a lot of applications or potential applications for this kind of technology then.
Yeah.
So that's why it's something that I was very interested in. That's why I'm going. That's my next step to get started on the next Photino feature.
Absolutely. I like it. And like we said just at the beginning of this last section, we're not holding you to account for if this doesn't ship before the episode does, before the end of the year. There's no time limit. This is just things that Otto is looking into and is excited about.
That's right. Yeah, no definite date on it. The date is I'm starting this week. That's the date you get.
Excellent. Which will be in the past by the time this comes out.
Right,
So.
right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so what about getting started with Photino then? Is the website the best place to go to?
Yeah.
Is there a GitHub repository? What's the best? I mean, I'll put the links into the show notes.
So we have a website with documentation on it that lists how to get started. What we also have is we have sample apps that you can get started with, to get familiar with what the architecture looks like, where to put your app, where to write your your app code, where to write your C# code if you want to get into the .NET level. So we have these sample apps that you can get. There's a sample app. Let's see. I hope I don't. I mean, if I forget some, you can look yourself. But there's an Angular sample app. There's a React sample app, a Vue sample app. There is a Blazor sample app. There is even a 3JS sample app. 3JS is a 3D modeling, 3D gaming engine in JavaScript, where you can also make games with Photino. So we have a little sample where I created a Pong game, with old school Pong bars and the ball that goes back and forth, but in 3D. So I created that and put that out as a sample app for 3JS. So yeah, people could make games actually using Photino if they wanted to. And then there is a general sample app that has some of the system calls explained and shown. Like, okay, here's where you make your window, your starting window a certain size, how you place it at a certain position on your desktop when it spins up, how you make it full screen when it spins up, when you want to hide the Chrome outside of the window, so people can't close the window, that sort of stuff. There's also a sample app on there. So that's the first thing you can do. You can get your hands on one of those samples. But of course, you can also go to the repo and get the source code for it and compile it yourself if you want to get down and dirty, so to say, in the lower level stuff. You can do that too, right? And make changes there, play around with that. Even to the native project, that's the native code that then runs or is compiled for the individual operating system that handles all the native communication. So that would be the C++ project or Objective-C project for Mac, where you're really at the lowest level to handle, how is the window even created, right? Where is the window hook managed and that sort of stuff. That's all compiled in the native project. So just depends on how deep you want to get into it. That's the level of it's the project that you would get into it.
Excellent. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll get a link to some of those things. I'll put them in the show notes. What about catching up with you, Otto? Are you an online person? I mean, some people are, some people aren't.
Yep, I'm online almost 24/7. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have contact. You can contact if you have any questions, suggestions, or anything on our Photino website. We have an email that you can contact us with. One of us will get back to you. Can also find us on Twitter. We have Twitter, where you can comment, message, whatever as well. Can get back at you there too. Yeah, so definitely always looking forward to people with interest.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I've had a great conversation talking about Photino with you today, Otto.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being on the show, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start playing around with it this afternoon, see what I can build.
Excellent.
I'm sure that an idiot like me could probably build something with it as well. Just create like a React app hello world and just put that into Photino and see what happens.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being on the show, Otto. I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Yeah, it was very, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too. And have a wonderful day.
That was my interview with Otto Dobretsberger. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that, or to reach out on our contact page. That's .netcore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.